Welcome back to our second discussion point of the day within the Cold War Continuum, the role of sound systems in the vibrational delusions of sonic warfare. I'm incredibly ecstatic to be here with Nik Nowak, whose exhibition we are standing within. So I think what we're going to do is maybe after my sitting through the first session, Nik, I'd really like to walk around. But first, I'd like to offer, obviously, a fuller introduction to Nik Nowak. So Nik Nowak is a German artist, musician, and curator. He focuses on the affective dimensions and potential of sound and space in his multimedia interdisciplinary work that re-engineers the formal boundaries between installations, performances, sculptures, videos, and paintings. In his artistic work, he examines the use of sound as a source of identity and socially formative element, as well as sound systems and cultural transmitters and acoustic weapons. Known primarily for his series of large-scale sound system sculptures and sound installations, including Panzer, Echo, and the Mantis, Nik Nowak's interdisciplinary projects are concerned with the wider cultural, political, and neuroaffective nuances of sonic ambiguities and acoustic weaponry inherent in the attraction-repulsion nexus of sound. As a graduate of the late Lothar Baumgarten Masterclass at Universität der Kunst, UDK, Berlin, his work has been exhibited in an array of international contexts. In 2014, he conceived and curated the critically well-received exhibition Booster, Art Sound Machine, in collaboration with Museum Martha Herford, bringing together an international roster of artists, all working with dimensions of sound and mobile sound systems. The exhibition was premised upon Nowak's ongoing long-term research into the global phenomenon of mobile sound systems and their local socio-political adaptations and characteristics, framed within an overarching and reverberative context of the First and Second World Wars, colonial history, and Cold War. In more recent years, Nik Nowak has dealt in particular with the German division and reunification, notably in sound installations and performances. In this context, he shows parallel and exemplary nodes in the sound politics of the Cold War in Germany, Korea, Vietnam, and Jamaica. His work, traversing the line between art, science, and technology, is characterized by the examination of identity in connection with collective, interdependent, but national traumas, and questions regarding the possibilities for the identity and social formations amidst the clamor of an increasingly digitalized and globalized world. Welcome, Nik Nowak, to your own space.
Yes, I also want to say thank you, Jessica, for designing this incredible program, which we will enjoy the whole day until 8:30, which is going to be very interesting. And also want to thank our fantastic team to put all this together and the collaboration with United We Stream for streaming, and thank you to funding for the funding to Music Board Berlin. And yeah, it's incredible to be here in the Kessel House again after it was closed for so long, or still is closed, but we have the chance to do this via stream, and I'm happy that we are able to do that from here and actually be in the space.
Yeah, I was going to say, because just as we had Berlin Art Week in 2020, September 2020, and then relatively the exhibition itself was seen as the highlight of the Berlin Art Week, and then unfortunately we all went into COVID lockdown conditions. So it's great to be back in this space, in an amazing towering space of, I mean, maybe you can tell me what the height of this is.
It's 20 meters.
It's a 20-meter high building. So yes, here we are. And I wondered, how would you like to start? Should we maybe run the video, or?
Well, I would probably introduce the installation a little bit, because I think I'm not sure who the audience is. Hello, audience. And I could imagine that a lot of people, that we probably have an international audience that haven't seen the exhibition yet. So it's basically a sound installation in which we have two of my major sound sculptures, Panzer and the Mantis, facing each other. And in the usual exhibition. For the visitors when the exhibition is open, we hear an audio play that tells the history of the loudspeaker war that was taking place in Berlin in the 1960s.
And that's the Lautsprecherkrieg.
Das ist der Lautsprecherkrieg.
In my very terrible German, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So
the loudspeaker war.
The loudspeaker war was initiated, or it started actually with with sonic attacks by the East, because Berlin was perceived as or West Berlin was perceived as a provocation, as a political act of provocation, and the loudspeaker or sonic attacks were supposed to disturb political speeches on the West side. The West was not taking that for long and answered with counterattacks and founded the Studio am Stacheldraht.
Okay.
The Studio am Stacheldraht was initiated by the RIAS, the Radio im amerikanischen Sektor, and through this countermaneuver, this developed to a kind of 5 years or almost 5 years escalation of not only finding the right words and arguments, but building bigger and bigger sound systems. That went so far that the Western sound systems in the end reached, I think, a height of 10 meters, where from VW, Volkswagen vans, it transformed into cranes that could reach over the wall and blast the messages, news, and also it was a news broadcast with music, but also with the intention to ask the border guards not to shoot shoot people that are trying to flee.
Okay. So, in terms of the aesthetics of what you're trying to do here within the installation, and maybe we can move around in a little while as well, but focusing on the Mantis, I mean, you've just mentioned the American, or obviously the West German, American-backed Studio am Stacheldraht, and as they develop a kind of technological arms race in terms of the sonic capacities to extend across the border, I suppose. So is the Mantis sort of redolent of those, kind of a reference to the loudspeaker cranes, the hydrolyzed cranes?
Exactly. The Mantis is actually a sculpture that was directly inspired by the vehicles from the loudspeaker war. On the west side, the cranes of the later period. And I was doing some research and tried to find out if I could find relics or leftovers from the Sonic War in Berlin, but I could only find some speaker elements in the Technical Museum in a storage. And so I basically decided to build kind of a how could you say, like a version that relates to that. Yeah, so, and this loudspeaker war was very much forgotten. It plays some role in the history of radio broadcasting, but as a phenomena, because it was in the early 1960s, there are not many people that actually remember this time of sonic warfare in Germany during the Cold War.
And not much left in the archives. I mean, I know you've been working particularly with the archives in terms of the sound installation that accompanies, or is actually, it's not that it accompanies, because I know you work primarily with sound, but sound as encased and instantiated through the visual, through these amazing visual architectural sculptures. Yes,
I work with sound, but the sculptural dimension is a basis. It's always related to actually building, engineering the sound systems, and we could actually watch the film, the Mantis project, that tells the story of the Mantis and also shows a little bit of the making of and the backgrounds of that story.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Elisa.
I built mobile sound systems.
Could we maybe have a little more volume?
I researched the use of sound as weapon.
Als Künstler beschäftige ich mich mit der Verwendung von Sound als kultureller Transmitter, wie es etwa in der Musik der Fall ist. Und demgegenüber mit dem Missbrauch von Sound als Waffe. Innerhalb dieses Kontextes interessiert mich auch der Effekt von Klang auf körperliche und psychische Zustände. Seit 15 Jahren beschäftige ich mich mit dem globalen Phänomen mobiler Soundsysteme und ihrer sozialen und politischen Bedeutung.
Exporte von Waffen in Kriegsgebiete ist nicht erlaubt und darf auch nicht nur aus Angst vor Rückzahlungen an die Industrie durchgeführt werden, sondern muss zurückgezogen und verboten werden.
Im Rahmen meiner jüngeren Recherche hat mich der sogenannte Lautsprecherkrieg, der entlang der Berliner Mauer in den 60er Jahren stattfand, fasziniert. Im Frühstadium der Berliner Mauer befanden sich die ideologisch getriebenen Divisionen des kommunistischen und kapitalistischen Deutschland mit hochgerüsteten Lautsprechersystemen über die Mauer hinweg in einem akustischen Krieg. Ganz ähnlich wie es noch bis vor kurzem an der Demarkationslinie von Nord- und Südkorea der Fall war. Während der Osten von der russischen Armee mit Lastkraftwagen, die mit Lautsprechern bestückt waren, den sogenannten Roten Hugos beliefert wurde, gründete der Westberliner Senat in Kollaboration mit dem RIAS, dem Radio im amerikanischen Sektor, das Studio am Stacheldraht. Die Hauptaussage des Studio am Stacheldraht war es, die Grenzsoldaten der Ostseite davon abzubringen, auf Flüchtende zu schießen. In einem 5-jährigen Prozess habe ich die Klangskulptur The Mantis entwickelt, welche in ihren formalen Qualitäten an die sich auftürmenden mobilen Lautsprecherkräne des Studio am Stacheldrahtes während der 1960er Jahre erinnert. Heute, 2019, 30 Jahre nach dem Mauerfall, ist der Berliner Lautsprecherkrieg fast vergessen. Und gleichzeitig erleben wir erneut, wie global psychische und physische Mauern aufgerichtet, Grenzen geschlossen werden und Europa zu zerfallen droht. Ich bin in den 80er Jahren aufgewachsen in der Endphase des Kalten Krieges. Wir haben damals erlebt, wie innereuropäische Grenzen geöffnet und abgebaut wurden, eine Demilitarisierung stattfand und Europa zu einer diversen Gesellschaft zusammenwuchs, in der sich die Möglichkeiten vieler Menschen multiplizierten. Nach dem Fall der Mauer bot Berlin als Stadt eine Menge Raum für Experimente, besonders für Künstler. Und die entstehenden Clubs wurden zur Schnittstelle für viele verschiedene Szenen und ihre Musik ein Katalysator zur Aktivierung von sozialen Veränderungen. Heute jedoch erleben wir eine Rückwärtsentwicklung, nicht nur in Deutschland, sondern weltweit, losgetreten insbesondere von Rechtspopulisten, die versuchen, unsere Gesellschaft zu spalten. Das Leben und seine Technologie ist komplexer geworden. Die Geschichte kann uns aber hoffentlich lehren, sich wiederholende Muster zu erkennen und zu hinterfragen. Der Film entstand mit Hiro Tanaka, der Regie geführt hat.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
Oh, sorry. Did I speak German?
You switched to German.
Didn't even recognize it. He was directing the film,
Yeah.
Hiro Tanaka.
I mean, I think it's a really comprehensive piece in the sense that it gives the whole story, or obviously not the whole story because we weren't there, but it gives a full engagement with the complexities of that period and the delusional methods and lengths that were that both sides took to gain sort of sonic superiority across the wall. I mean, I wonder, maybe we can have a little walk around, and
Sure.
I'm really intrigued about maybe thinking, if I can put that there for a minute.
Only you are allowed to do that.
Only I'm allowed to do that. I'm sorry. But maybe thinking about this wider engagement with these specific issues, how they play into maybe your politics, but also your visual politics as well, visual and sonic politics in your work, and just where this engagement with, the whole period of the Cold War for you began, really.
Yeah, I mean, this question gets raised very often in the context also, where does this militaristic aesthetic come from, or why are my installations so you could say dystopic in its aesthetic, and it definitely has something to do with my with the background of coming from an area that was very militaristic or occupied by military. By military, I wanted to say by the not just military, but also the technology that comes with the military.
Yes.
So we had one of the biggest tank factories in mines outside of the US.
Wow.
And it was an area that was it was American sector or American territory, or not territory, but
West Berlin. So,
no,
sorry,
Mainz,
West
Rheinland-Pfalz.
Yes, West Germany.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes,
yes.
West Germany, and so the presence of the American military was an everyday experience that we had as children. The tanks were driving by at the kindergarten, and the forest. When we wanted to reach the forest, we had to get through a military training camp.
Wow.
Where the tanks were driving through. And there were a lot of, it was a lot of fencing as well, but we as kids, we pretty much ignored that. But we always knew when we were crossing areas that we were not supposed to cross, and then we were in the middle of these training scenarios. That, at least for me as a child, was very impressive in the sense that I could always see the military and the industry during a time of peace in Germany, where it was always very obvious that there is an active global war going on. And I think that impression of the simultaneous existence of war and peace, or kind of the relation between war and peace, that was something that I think occupied my work over the last decades.
I mean, I think when I first engaged and encountered your work, one of the things, and hearing this sort of background as well, which you're sharing very kindly with the audience today, of this Cold War ensconcement in an area where the US military had a presence that seemed to, from all accounts, quite dominate the town. The architecture of the military almost, the presence of the military almost architected the city where you could move in some sense. But yes, the way in which I wonder how much of that. Maybe we don't have to ask how much of that seeped into your osmotically or otherwise, how much it seeped into you and then became a mode. Because obviously, I think the thing that you're not doing is glorifying or validating this militaristic aspect. It's more of a it's not a sonic repulsion. It's not about, or at least how I engage with your work, it's not about a repulsion. It's much more attractional. And maybe you can say something about.
I think the music in my work is very important. I always tomorrow we stream the performance A War of Decibels. So the music is always on the performative side, is always there, and that is. In there is a lot of fascination and love for the sound and for what music actually can do and what rhythm can do. But in the same time, on the sculptural level, I think it's also the what mirrors in there is the impression by the posturing of these gestures of how could you say, the military gestures that
what do you mean, like a sort of territorialization of space, like taking up?
Yeah, I mean that
power
exactly.
and
So what I
control,
mean,
yes.
I think as a child, but also as a young man, I always wondered and thought, like, where is all that aggression and that where are all these postures coming from? And they are threatening, and they are impressive. Also on a the impression is at first there, even if it's good or bad, you know. I mean, I just mean it's impossible to ignore.
It's impossible to escape that
and there are a lot of
period.
symbols that come with this with these activities that we in Germany were being exposed to or something. But this is a phenomena that is global. Yeah, so it's like so it doesn't really matter if you were growing up on, let's say, in the former GDR, having that experience from Russian military impression, or in West Germany from a Western from American military. What I want to get to is actually things like these tank barriers that you see in the exhibition. They are fakes. They're built by me, so they are basically sculptures. They are out of wood, but those are also some of those things that we all know from
the signification
some
is so
experience
strong,
of
yes.
Either acute war situations or former war situations. Those are we just have them in our memory, and they all lead to the aspect of division of countries, but also division of societies. And I think that is also what the title tries to do.
Yeah,
Schizo Sonics.
let's maybe, shall we take a bit of a walk and
Yeah.
maybe we can go on the other side of the
So we have
those
this
benches.
whole installation
Yes.
is divided by this fencing, and we find those more than ever before now around Europe, everywhere. We know these fences as border fences in the context of the borders of Europe, when we have more borders than we had ever before. You know, so it's like. I think the title Schizo Sonics speaks to that experience of multiple divided societies and the problem of actually building or developing a concept of identity. We can go to the other
So
side.
this, I think, well, without trying to read into it, but it's kind of this schizophrenic nature. I mean, I think maybe picking up on Steve Goodman's paper a little earlier, this contaminatory, highly contagious mentality of spreading and spreading discord and this paranoia, you know, leading to the erection of more walls, as you say, across Europe. You know, Europe becomes even more fortressed. We have Brexit. We have Hungary's turn to the right. We have a lot of Europe's increasing turn to the right. But I wondered if we could maybe think about, because of the work you're making, you know, it's not being used in a militaristic or an aggressive manner. You have used them, the Panzer. Maybe you can tell people in a moment about the Panzer. But I was thinking about the way in which, as a sort of, not as a sort of, but as a German post-Cold War artist, it seems that you're constantly sort of interrogating and maybe trying to exfoliate these very difficult, traumatic periods in German history.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I just said in terms of working out an identity or trying to locate myself or others that are like me, you know, it's kind of a general question about understanding one's own complexity. Because in my case, for example, I'm born in West Germany, but on the other hand, it feels like a random coincidence, and especially our generation is one. Through digital globalization, we have all the same influences, but there are these kind of locally imprinted, often through media propaganda of the 80s and 90s, conceptions of the world. I don't mean that these conceptions must be extreme or kind of very obvious. They sometimes sub-layers in these worldviews. They pop up or come out in multiple forms all the time, and I think this is something that I'm trying to engage with as a practice. So it's kind of a practice of kind of taking layers off, trying to think through history, maybe also using myself as a tool to find roots that I haven't seen before. For example, my family comes from Schlesien. Part of my family still is in the area which is today Poland, and there is kind of a lack of contact, which is still a heritage from, or kind of still comes through the tabuization of this time after the Second World War, that these families were divided and they partly didn't speak to each other. And it's the same story for a lot of Polish families that have kind of relatives in second generation that don't know each other, but that is this division through that experience of trauma in that time. And with that comes the recognition of a certain randomness on what either side or you grow up and develop your personality or your vision on the world.
I think what's quite exciting as well is because obviously you work both with the visual and the sonic, is the way in which, I mean, I've seen some of the works that you've developed using the Panzer, and this is why I think I was coming to this question of trauma. And you mentioned the word earlier, the dub plates. You make these dub plates. I just wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit about what the process of what you're doing.
Yeah, well, because actually, I mean, we didn't speak about that at all. But I'm working in different media, like we talked about music and performance and installation and sound. But actually, I'm coming from drawing and painting. So painting and drawing was always an absolutely important tool for me to develop work or to start actually also on an abstract level to find out sometimes to get access to my intuition or to find ways of thinking that I didn't rationally or intellectually thought to go before. So painting was always a basis for my work, and when I was starting to build these tank sculptures, I was kind of fascinated by the moment of torque, by the pressure in the turning. I mean, everyone knows this. If both tracks are moving into different directions, that you turn in a circle.
It's the moment of turning, yeah.
And so I prepared wooden or aluminum plates with several layers of lacquer, and then I had a very sometimes kind of a perfect surface, and then I would drive over them in circles and rip the surface open again. I believe we have some images about the plates as well.
Yeah, Lisa, could you play this for us, please?
And
so it seems that what you're saying is, just in relation to the point you were making before, that there's some sort of psychic
I wanted to
engagement
I
with.
I wanted to get to the point because we have images. I was just thinking we have images about the dub plates, which on an abstract level works in the same way, like the music I do as well. So it's a lot of layering and then ripping open the layers that have been overdubbed. And that is kind of a method that I use on an abstract level, but I also work like that more in a way of collages, like collecting materials, collecting stories, collecting recordings and images, and rearranging these images and trying to find patterns, or sometimes using intuition to come to new solutions. And I think we also have images of the collages, and I think that is something we could show, because the ripping open of the surfaces and the collages, they have a lot to do with each other in my work. And this is also the strategy how I come to conclusions, like in this case, for example, finding a parallel between sound clashes in Jamaica and the sound battle in Berlin and the sonic face-off in Korea. They were at first they were formal similarities to big sound systems that face each other. There was something where I thought, like, this is probably something that I experienced, or that I found out through collecting images. But then it goes on that you ask yourself, where are the supplies coming from? Whose loudspeakers are built into the sound system that is standing in Korea on that side? And then you find out the connections that are of a political nature. And that is how it goes on. Then I collect recordings and collect these informations, and it basically becomes something like it's like digging deep in history, and also stories of history of trauma, of global trauma, and then trying to retell the story, connecting these formal parallelities. Parallels even, yes.
I mean, I think when you broaden out the scope, as you say, to look at, and particularly in terms of what the Cold War does anyway, is that it embroils and entangles, people that we wouldn't necessarily have thought had been embroiled in the Cold War, and proxy wars underpinning, or rather supporting the Cold War. But yeah, I was just thinking about, you mentioned dub plates, you mentioned sound clashes, and, this engagement, particularly in some of the collages I've seen of your work, where there is an inherent engagement with the West Indies and in particular Jamaican sound system culture. And I just wonder if we're able to maybe think about the sort of formal qualities of the Panzer in that respect.
I mean, yes, the Panzer is a sculpture that I've built in 2009, actually over 3 years, so I started 2007 or something like that. And that was oriented on the architectural form of Jamaican sound systems. So it was like oriented on the stacks and piles of heavy subwoofer systems, and relatively little section of high tones on the top.
Because we want the bass.
We want the bass, and we want to have the physical effect of the bass. And that is actually also the part where, yes, I mean, bass can be threatening, and Steve Goodman talked about it, about his experience at the museum, an experience which I also know, and I find that very interesting. We have problems in these institutions using bass, and we use it in different levels. I mean, we know bass can create fear, but bass can also create euphoria. We all know that from music experiences. And so in this context, it was a very simple idea of a hybridization of a military object with a civil sound system, which actually has a lot to do with Jamaican history. If we think about Hadley Jones, who you will probably talk more about in a later talk. So this transfer from I have a problem with this word because I'm because
you're a pacifist.
A pacifist. The transfer from technology, from military, into civil usage and musical context.
Yeah,
that is actually the kind of this hybrid was all about that, and then in the further research about stories that will be talked about in later talks. So we don't need to go too far into it because, as I understand, there's a whole section about Jamaica and Jamaican sound system history.
But no, I think it's this engagement with these references, and I know that in perhaps previous conversations at other of your exhibitions in the past before COVID, where we've managed to talk, and the references not simply from the American influence and habituation of where you grew up.
Yeah.
And so some of the things that you were coming to in your formative, childhood years, as this ongoing influence, and obviously the global spread of
one very interesting aspect of that, especially in the context of Jamaican music, also from the music from the 70s and the 80s. In the audio play Schizo Sonics or War of Decibels, which we will hear tomorrow, it's also about the 1970s in Jamaica, where there is this.
Maybe you don't want to talk too much about
that.
No,
I don't want to talk too much about it, but what I want to say is the distribution of the records of that time later had to do with a market and record distribution into Western markets. But still in the music are a lot of ideas that the socialists try to use for themselves, or kind of use for their political message, because Rastafarian ideas deal a lot with human rights, and although they, as Bob Marley said in several interviews, that he is on neither side, no kind of communist or capitalist side, but the music in the end was distributed in the West, as I think, because of the change of powers, that the Conservative Party was close to the US, and that's where the market distribution happens, and that's and in the end, so that gets a bit complicated. But the message of Jamaican music then got simplified to be kind of depoliticized by the
commercial product.
To actually kind of equalize or kind of level down the political message. And these are Cold War dynamics, actually, of the 70s, 80s in soft politics, or where it's about. Bob Marley was a big threat for the American as a political figure, and then it's kind of the intervening in that of the secret services to kind of control the influence of that popular music, which is actually, I think, an enormous story, that this music actually, that is so politically important and far-reaching, also reached that globally influential political level.
From a tiny island.
Yes,
from a very tiny island. Okay, maybe we can think about how this ties back to, and I saw obviously in the Mantis video, you have, there's an engagement with thinking about Korea. Maybe you could tell to us a little bit about your North Korea project, if you want to.
I will. I actually want to add something to dub music, and I think when I was talking about the collages, I think that same interest in collaging and taking similar, how can I say, the parallel that I see to dub music is taking these tracks, recordings, replaying them, remixing them, is a practice that makes it possible to work out an idea of identity. That's what I spoke earlier about, and I think.
Oh, you mean in the dub plates themselves that you're making? I mean the dub
No,
plates
I mean actually dub music.
Yes, the dub and the overlay and the palimpsest nature of dub music, but also in the process of you're making
collaging and of trying to scratch open history and rethinking history and coming to an idea of a society. And this is for me the most fascinating part about Jamaican music, that actually this music was so relevant to create an idea of a society in a political context which is directly connected to the violence and brutality and trauma of slavery and the colonial abuse of African countries. And then being kind of brought on this little island and having to create an idea of identity out of this trauma in that complexity and dimension of diversity was majorly worked out by music in my
and this is also a dimension that you come to within the sound installation, which will be streamed tomorrow, War of Decibels, right? Yes. So we hope people tune in for that.
Tomorrow at 8.
At 8. Okay. So do you want to think about North Korea, your North Korea project? Yes. Brilliant. Thank you, Elisa. We have your collages here, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yes, actually, North Korea in that context was... I started thinking about North Korea relatively early, when I was around 19 years old or something, in terms of the politics, and as well because of the parallels to German history. But then many years later, I got the opportunity actually to go to North Korea personally and trying to do a project there. But the card that I was able to play to make my interest in the how can I say when I went to North Korea, speaking to North Korean our fixers, I was telling them the story of Berlin and the division of Berlin and the loudspeaker war, which is still something that is practiced in at the DMZ, or was.
By the DMZ, you mean the demilitarized zone?
The demilitarized zone, right. So what I actually was trying to do to say that I said we had a loudspeaker war with the same ideological conflict in Germany, and now I'm here to kind of research this kind of sonic strategies and loudspeaker war. And that was very plausible because it was like very easy to show, look, this was how it was in the 60s, it's still like that here, and that's what I'm trying to find formally. So I was actually trying to capture as much musical propaganda activity in Pyongyang as I could, and document that. And in the same time, I tried to add something to this sound of Pyongyang, or sound of communist, or you can't even call it communist in that way, but Juche ideology, propaganda. Which is, of course, it feels like a time travel, so it really sounds like a communist environment in what the music soundscape is like. But you have loudspeakers pretty much everywhere that are blasting patriotic music. So what I try to do is capturing the soundscape in itself, but also adding a sound which I recorded, or a soundscape that I composed out of unaudible sounds. Again, Steve Goodman spoke about that, unsound. he did a very far-reaching, very deep talk. Very happy about that. Yes, so what I did, it was a project called Infra Ultra, where I recorded sounds from the unaudible frequency spectrums, so below 20 hertz and above 20 kilohertz, and pitched them down and up in the audible spectrum, so that it's kind of a information from a parallel acoustic reality.
An acoustic reality that we're not usually party to, right? Without
but
technological
which is always
intervention.
there.
Yes.
So the question then for me in this, again, it's an abstract piece, like the dub plates are abstract paintings or drawings. This is an very abstract piece of sound art or something, or music. So in this piece is this idea of an inside and an outside of a certain frequency spectrum, and playing that inside North Korea also for me was kind of a double-folded idea of playing not only these abstract sounds, but also an idea of sound art in itself, which has nothing to do with the North Korean idea of art, which is only in the service of the ideology. Right. So it was also kind of an intervention of discussing concepts of art and inside and outside of ideological or cultural spheres. I want to show one video excerpt that is 4 minutes long, maybe, where you see this almost absurd intervention, which was the first, probably the first time a Western so-called Cold War language Western artist doing a sound intervention, sound art intervention in Pyongyang.
Oh wow!
We can.
Shall we have a look at that, Elisa?
Have a look at that.
Yes. Thank you.
Let you guys prophesy. We gon' see the future first. We'll let you guys prophesy. We gon' see the future first. Living so the last night feels like a past night. Speaking of the don't know what got into people. Double people sense of always demons try to bite each other. Why you think I'm in this bitch when I'm fucking yarmulke? Acid on me like the rain. Weed bubbles in the glitter.
Is it okay if you put it behind the boat? No, it has to be behind the bush.
Okay. Because behind the boats you wouldn't see it. If you want me to put it behind the greenery, we can do it.
We said the greenery. Yes.
Whatever's acceptable.
Behind the greenery, please.
Do you think
some
there,
bush
where it's bushy?
Yeah, or within those bushes maybe.
Yeah.
In those bushes. Sure.
Sorry, Lizzie, did you say 12 minutes left?
No, it's so that it also runs in a loop, so there's nothing that can okay? Yeah.
There's a lot to say about that, right?
Yeah, one thing about that video, why I wanted to show that is in North Korea was very much the order that our fixers had was to make sure that we could have as little as possible influence. So there was all the negotiation about me placing this loudspeaker somewhere, which was actually a side project of another bigger project that was completely censored.
Right.
So that was something that where I kind of was successful to force it through, that I was able to do this thing that was like...
But after having been refused many of your other requests.
Yes, and then actually having these negotiations where to put the speakers, and it's so bureaucratic that it had to be behind greenery, because that's what we agreed on the day before, so it couldn't be anywhere else. And I loved the absurdity of the moment. There actually were quite some citizens walking by and looking and so on, and then just after 7 minutes or something, an older guy came along and complained, and our fixers got so scared and paranoid that they said we have to leave, we have to break that intervention, and that is how it actually works. That it's such a self-censorship that someone who's actually not even in any who actually has no authority, and we were allowed to do that. We kind of this sound was kind of silenced immediately, whilst everywhere else in the city you have full blasting the whole night through loudspeaker systems.
These concerts that you intersplice with the film. And it's so loud and jingoistic. Yeah, and
then you have this one performance in the conservatorium where you see this map of whole Korea with Pyongyang in the middle. There was something I got that was explained to me a lot, that there would be because I was always thinking about kind of this aspect of contradictional ideological sound clashes, and talking about that in North Korea in regard to another project, which was called the Symphony of Silence. So they explained to me the only thing that would be possible in terms of unification would be unification with one single voice, and that is, of course, then that's the voice of Pyongyang, and that is what I wanted to get to, this impossibility of having this simplified idea of one kind of mono. mono idea of the world, rather than developing a concept of identity within all the complexity and history of trauma, in which we are all kind of in the one or the other way thrown into. Yes, so that aspect of actually contrast to Schizo Sonics, to this idea of a mono soundscape of a yes,
and the maintenance of a mono soundscape, even the slightest deviation from it is reined back in. I just want to ask Elisa, have you got any questions for us at the moment? No questions. Okay, so I mean, it goes further, in particularly when you play the Mantis video, and you see the escalation. So the escalations of tensions, which we saw between Trump and Kim Jong-un, and then much more recently, the blowing up of the Joint Security Office, which was supposed to be the the kind of the neutral zone. And as you say, the kind of escalation that we've had more walls now than we ever had before. So, maybe you can say a little bit more about how you're engaging with that in terms of not just this work, but, other things that you're thinking, other projects and things that you're thinking about, or collecting and researching.
Ask again?
No, I'm just, because it's an abiding thing that you keep coming back to.
You mean it's a continuous thing? Yeah, I think that I'm not able to kind of not see the problem. So it's like kind of we are dealing with so many layers of history and especially trauma, and in that context also the social, political, like the immediate political, not solved conflicts or problems. I think I had this idea when I was in my maybe early 20s or something, that we are going into a direction of, let's say, certain movements would be successful, and the world would be a better place. But there was a naive idea, and the experience is it goes further and further away, and there is no possibility to, or for me, it's kind of the political engagement in my work becomes more and more consistent. That's what I want to say, because I think a few 15, 20 years ago, or I'm not that old, but 10 to 15 years ago, I think I would always have avoided to think of myself as a political artist. But now, and I still don't think that I'm necessarily a political artist, but it's so I feel, or I see myself a little bit like actually in its aesthetics, like a war artist, even though I'm not coming from a war zone. Let's say I wasn't exposed to a battlefield.
But it seems that you're dealing with your work is always interrogating and engaging with the afterlives, the afterlives and the entanglement of war. That a war is never within a singular country, as we see in Germany, and again in this work here. It may have happened at the German border, but it's global spread. The resonant waves is always there too. I don't know. So what do you want to do in... I mean, I'm sure people are... Maybe they think these are static objects or pieces, but actually they're fully drivable, right?
I mean, they are fully functional and drivable. Both have work as sound systems.
And with their capacity as what?
Around 10,000 watts each, and I would really recommend to tune in to the performance tomorrow, where they are not driving, but where actually you can experience the kind of the musical concept. And
do you want to give the title again?
A War of Decibels.
A War of Decibels. At what time is it being streamed?
At 8.
Central European time.
And we actually, this is something that we would like to establish. We want to have a Spenden button for Sea-Watch that we would like to put into the information. But we were not able to do that today. We tried to do that for tomorrow.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. Obviously, you can see I could go on and on talking to you. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a very long time, so thank you for the opportunity to do that. I just want to also give our audience a bit of an orientation of where we're going next. So we're going to take a very short break now, and when we come back, we'll be moving on to part 2 of the session of the Cold War Continuum. And this part we're calling the unsound methods, eavesdropping and sonic inversions in the escalating of Cold War terror. And this will be hosted or chaired by Martin Kowalski. So see you after the break.
Thank you.